Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Jane Boutel with Digsite, and I'm very, very happy to have you here today for our webinar. We'll be talking about how a brand got big insights about their consumers that they were able to use to really actually hold a very, very successful retailer meeting. So again, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, just a couple of quick points. We are recording this session today, and so you will get a copy of that recording within the next day or two after the session is over. So sit back, relax, and enjoy it, and you can watch it again later or share it with a colleague. Anyway, if you have any questions along the way, we would love to hear from you. If you look at your GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar control panel on the right of your screen, you'll see an area that says questions, and feel free to type your questions in at any point in time along the way, and we'll answer them for sure at the end, or if not along the way as well. This session will probably go a little bit less than an hour, I'm guessing, and so I hope you'll stay with us for the whole time. With that, I'd like to introduce you to our presenter today. That is my colleague and co-founder, Monika Wingate, and Monika is the CEO of Digsite. And Monika's got a real wealth of market research experience from consumer products companies like General Mills and Pillsbury, through work in advertising agency, and she ran her own brand consulting firm for a number of years. So I think she has some great perspective to add. So I will turn it over now to Monika.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. Today, as Jane said, we have probably about a 30-minute presentation along with some Q&A. And what we're going to be really talking today is about a very specific case study on how using consumer insights and concept validation basically help bolster a retail presentation for a company called PD Holdings. And they have agreed to share some of the findings of their research as well. So you'll get to see some of the actual results of their research. And we're going to talk a little bit also about some tips for successful presentation with retailers. I was able to interview a retail buyer and have some very specific suggestions for you. And then we'll close up with just a little bit about agile research overall and how you might be able to use those approaches if you're a marketer or a researcher in your organization. Really, either way, you don't have to be a research expert to do agile research. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So first, let's just kind of talk about this opportunity. The customer, PD Holdings, had a key meeting set up with a major retailer, and they had just a few weeks to prepare for this meeting. As Ned Becker said, when you try to organize a study with multiple consumer groups, it takes a lot of time, and they just didn't have that time. And so they reached out to us and said, how can you help us? What can we learn very, very quickly? What they wanted to do was essentially validate some product concepts that they were going to present to retailers. They wanted to optimize the positioning of that and really make a clear case. But they didn't just have one target audience. They had two very distinct target audiences that overlap slightly but not a ton, and that was millennials and moms. And so they really wanted to make sure that they were clear on the benefits of their product to each target group and how they could really specifically address their needs and wants, and really demonstrate to the retailer that this is an unmet need that they're solving in the marketplace. And so the approach that they used for this research is called a Digsite Sprint. And essentially, what a Digsite Sprint does is allow you to engage with a group of consumers over the course of about a week. Actually, the week from start to finish, so you're doing about 4 to 5 days worth of activities with them, and then it takes you a day or so to get the community up and running and recruited. And over that period of time, you're really able to prioritize what are consumers' needs and wants versus existing products, and then optimize their specific product, get feedback on it, and then iterate. So as they learned information, they didn't have to be done like you would with a survey or focus group. They could come back and say, what about this or what about that, and really make sure that they have dead-on great ideas that were going to be compelling to that retailer and that they could build a strong story for. And So really, for them, they saw this as not only a great initial concept feedback, but something that was cost-effective and fit within their time frame. And I think one of the unique things about sprints is this collaborative approach, where essentially what this process looked like was that Digsite actually has a number of sprint templates. We work with the client to customize that for their needs. We design the community, we upload the community for them. So they didn't have to have the research expertise on how to ask those questions, but they were able to get onto that community directly during that week and not just observe behind the glass, but actually ask questions individually of participants and even of the group as they were in real time watching what people said. And so it gave them some ability to adjust on the fly, adjust questions on the fly, and even as I mentioned in the last day, really to think about if there are specific additional questions or activities we need to do with this consumer group. And I think, from their perspective, what this was able to do is really feel like they were able to get real, honest feedback. And they really got that engagement where they could tell this was their target consumer. These were real people, and they're telling real stories, and it was very, very compelling for them, but not something they had to watch from behind the glass. They were actually able to collaborate in that experience with us. Now, what does the participant experience look like when you do something like this? So in this case, we set up a community for them with on health products. They were able to sign in on their mobile device. Participants were able to sign on the mobile device, on their tablet, on their computer. By the way, as was the client, which is great for them. They were not at their desk. And really able to complete activities and answer questions right there in the moment. And, see if they have additional follow-up questions. They'll get an email. They come back in and continue to participate over that time frame. So who did they talk to, and how did we find them? So they talked to 30 moms and 30 millennials. The moms were basically aged 25 to 50. They had kids aged 2 to 10 at home, and you can kind of see the distribution of age ranges. They were across the U.S. So it wasn't a specific market. It was actually able to represent the whole country. And then with millennials, they were looking at, again, that age 18 to 34, very diverse demographic. And some of these folks were, I believe some of them were moms. I don't remember saying, yeah. So they did have some mom millennials as well. And how these participants were found. So Digsite uses a unique tool called Social Find, and what this meant was that we were basically able to identify folks who are on social media who either expressed interest in or shown that they've taken behaviors to buy specific products that this company was interested in. So in this case, we were able to really target in on the specific moms that shopped at these specific retailers and get them into this community for them very, very quickly. And done within, I believe, within 48 hours, everybody was on board and participating. So very quick turnaround. And what's really different about this process versus other types of recruiting processes is because we're able to target based on people's actual behavior, we know that they're engaging in that behavior before we even invite them to the community. And this gets a lot of the fakers kind of out of the communities. And also, we don't use national panel companies that are typically used for survey research. A lot of those types of panels have people who either aren't very articulate and can't have a discussion. Since this is social media, obviously these folks are very well versed in communicating on a social media site like Digsite, and they're truly being recruited fresh for this project, or they've participated in other Digsite projects, but they're not in a database filling out surveys every day. That's not who we identify with to complete these studies, and we think we get basically very high quality participants because of that. So I'm going to give you a couple examples here if you want to take a minute to read them of when we asked a millennial and a mom to tell us about themselves, what they said. And I think one of the things that you'll notice as you read these is just the level of depth and the level of engagement that you feel in reading these descriptions. They're really able to talk about, why they're using particular products they are, and you kind of get a sense of their personalities in what they're saying. and the differences here between what a millennial's life and priorities are versus what a mom's life and priorities are. A couple things I can tell you about the actual findings from this initial activity where we got to know participants. They really was clear that these participants wanted, the client clearly wanted to iterate with their consumers and really learn from them. And so as they were able to read these discussion points, they were able to ask some follow-up questions, learn more about them and their specific needs and usage of over-the-counter medication. So the next activity was actually to show them some specific concepts related to millennials and moms and get their feedback on those concepts. And so here you could see kind of a graphic of a specific product, and the participants basically dragged pluses, minuses, and question marks right onto that concept to get feedback. And this is really the way for them to not only express what they liked and whether they liked the concept overall, which you can kind of see a star rating at the bottom, but to really give in-depth feedback about what they liked and didn't like and what they didn't understand about the concept. And sure, some specific feedback that they got from millennials, for example, was that millennials were really interested in convenience. They were looking at minimizing the hassle of taking their medications, with the type of medication, even the packaging of that medication, and that was really important to them. Another thing that millennials mentioned that were really important to them, we could tell from this concept, was they were concerned about how easy it is to actually consume the medication, whether it's swallowing the pill, taking a powder, whether it's chewable. Those are all things that had meaning and value to millennials when they thought about over-the-counter medications. The other thing is that for millennials, taste does matter. They're looking for something that tastes good, something with some flavor to it, and that was important to them. For moms, a couple things that they were really interested in. One was kind of in the mobility of that medication, so something that they could easily take with them, something that isn't going to spill or make a mess or be cumbersome to take along. They were also obviously concerned about kids' consumption and whether the kids are going to like that product or they're going to comply with taking it. So that's obviously a huge issue. All of us who are moms, I know, have probably struggled with that at some point. And then whether it's on the go or at home, just things that aren't going to make a mess or things that kids would spit out or cause other kinds of problems. So you can see here how the priorities on the product features were very different between the millennials and the moms. They were able to really get that in-depth feedback in this community forum. The other activity, kind of unique activity that we were able to do with participants is actually ask them, hey, come up with your ideal products based on some of the concepts that you saw. You can improve on them. You can create whole new ideas. But tell us what would make you want to buy something new or try something new. What would be better than what you're buying now? And here is a very specific example from Tiana, who is a millennial, and she drew up this picture of her ideal product. It's try your favorite OTC med in our new chewable liquid, and she called it Blast Chews. And so you can see some of her features that she thought were important to her. And then she also wrote a description of it to say, hey, this is my favorite concept, and here's how I felt like I would want to promote it, and really provide a lot more in-depth insight, not just on what they like or don't like, but really how can you position it to her in a way that has meaning for her specifically. And obviously the goal of this isn't for PD Holdings to use this exact wording, but to look for themes across the participants and really help them understand what they're internalizing, and when they say convenient or when they say no mess, how are they actually putting that into the concept, and how are they talking about that, and it really provided them a lot more richness. The other thing you can see here is it provides a lot of visual fodder which they can share with retailers, which I think was was very helpful for them. They were able to show, very specifically on the previous slide here, they were able to show very specific feedback on concepts and overall ratings and rankings of sections of that concept, as well as then very specific ideas from consumers and even stories about their lives. So what were some of the outcomes of this specific research study for PD Holdings? The first thing was just really an in-depth understanding of what is important to each of these two audiences, understanding what their lives are like, understanding why this is important versus other features or other products that might be in that retail environment, really helped PD Holdings make sure they were able to create a very clear story on why their new product was important. Solid product direction. Obviously, as you all know, when you're developing a product, you have a lot of trade-offs to make along the way. You have to decide, whether you're going to include certain features or benefits based on the price implications of those things. You might really want to understand what to communicate on a package. All of those things are extremely difficult, and there's some really expensive quantitative testing that you can do. But sometimes, what you really need to know is what is the thing that everybody cares about, or what is the thing that nobody cares about. And I think research studies like this really help to confirm, yep, those things that I thought were really important, they are important to everybody. Or, hey, the thing I thought was important to everybody was only important to half the people. And qualitative researchers are really good at helping you understand things that really kind of are clear winners and clear losers. And I think this is something that they felt was really, really helpful for them in terms of, what are the must-haves in this product to really drive interest from consumers. The next area is really optimizing that positioning. And positioning is a very difficult concept, and very difficult thing for companies to really get right, because sometimes what consumers say they want isn't exactly how they want you to tell it to them. So, for example, I might tell you that I want to feel reassured that when I take this product it's safe, but maybe I don't want you to actually say, oh, it's going to be okay, right? But that's not really how I want you to position the product. I want you to position the product as being, this is going to be really effective, but it's also safe. And so I think, the types of activities that we have here that PD Holdings used really help them to understand what was the clear, important language that they needed to use, what were those keywords that participants were saying back to them, and what were the things that were resonating to them in the concepts that they saw. And I think this really helped them make sure that it was clear for moms how this product would be positioned, and for millennials how those products would be positioned, and that those would be really very distinct positionings, even though some of the product features might be very, very similar. Another area that PD Holdings was able to understand is how different is this from competitive offerings, and what does that mean in terms of people likely to buy the product, likely to pay more for the product, things like that. They were able to really get at a solid understanding of differentiation. And ultimately, obviously, the most important thing here was that they had a successful retailer meeting. And as they said, the data from Digsite gave them enough punch in our presentation to turn some heads with our retail customer. And I think that was, obviously the most important thing coming in. I think they were able to kind of hit a home run in their presentation, which obviously made us very happy as well. I want to switch gears here and talk a little bit about retailer presentations. If any of you work in any kind of product that's sold at a retail store, it doesn't really matter what company you work for. You've probably had to touch a retail presentation, whether you're in marketing and sales and research. And there's some really important things that you need to consider when preparing for a retail presentation that I want to kind of talk through with you. So the first thing is, obviously, you want to make sure that the insights are relevant to that retailer that you're presenting to. And that means that you need to reflect their core consumers' views. So, for example, if you know that if your retailer is Target, and you know that there's a target mom and she's a particular demographic and she's a particular type of person, having those people specifically represented in your research is going to be important to them. If you're just talking to the Walmart shopper, they're not really going to be that interested in the results. So you have to kind of really make sure that it's relevant to that retailer and you can show that their target audience is representative. The second thing is that really your insights need to be very easily digestible. I think probably all of you at some point seen a research report that's hundreds of pages. It in some cases feels like an embarrassment to our industry because, you know, if we show people a lot of data without any implications, it doesn't drive decisions. It doesn't make people feel better. It makes them feel confused. So it's really important to provide decisions that or insights that can be really easily remembered and relayed. So an example would be, you know, 79% of moms are very concerned about nut allergies, so I'm adding more options that are nut-free to the school gifting assortment. And, you know, so you're saying something very particular that's data-driven, and you're saying something very particular in terms of the implications of that for the retailer. And so, you know, that's something that you don't want to overcomplicate. And a lot of times, like all of us, retailers are really visual people. If you can give them quotes, if you can give them photos, if you can give them things that help them internalize the emotional meaning of what you're saying, it's very helpful as well. So not just thinking about numbers and statistics, but thinking about context and stories is very, very helpful in a retail presentation. The next thing is really thinking about going to that retailer with insights that help them understand the overall category rather than just being self-serving for your specific brand. You know, if you come into a retailer and you tell them, hey, these are the things that are really important in this section of the store, and some of these things have nothing to do with my brand, but you should know that some of these things are specific to what I'm coming in to talk to you about today, you have more credibility. To be honest, it's that whole concept of being a category captain that probably some of you have heard about, and just thinking about what value can I provide this retailer that's useful to them overall. How can you grow the overall business for that retailer, not just the business towards your brand? And in fact, if what you're doing is going to hurt the total sales of the category, they're obviously not going to be interested. So you really need to talk more broadly than just about benefits for your specific brand, but for the product category as a whole. The next area is make sure that the buyer wants or needs the insights that you're bringing. Now, this might seem odd, but remember that retail buyers have access to their own research resources, and they may already have data on the topic that you're coming in to present to them about. So if there's a possibility that you can find out what information they already have or what the gaps are that they have in their learning, then you can come in with things that are of real value to them. But if you're just providing them redundant information from what they already know, then it doesn't really feel like a big value add for them. And so it's really helpful to make sure that you've kind of connected with them in advance and understand what they might already know. And then obviously the last thing is bring your consumer to life and show how you solve their problems. So what is the solution that you're providing that solves their problem? And you saw this very specifically in the PD Holdings community where they showed very specific concepts and were able to have feedback about those and the impact to that participant's life and why it's important to them. So it's not just saying, here's a problem, we're solving that problem, but it's also saying, here's how consumers see the solution being perceived versus the competition. And I think that really is very helpful for retailers to know, not just that you've identified a problem that, you know, that maybe they weren't aware of, but that you have a solution that consumers want. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is why digital tools. You know, I'm sure that many of you have used focus groups in the past to prepare for retailer meetings. It's a very kind of common approach, and a lot of you probably have used surveys as well. And so what can digital tools offer you that traditional research tools don't? So let's talk, relative to focus groups, recruiting using a digital tool like Digsite can be turned around in a day, 24 to 48 hours, which preparing for a focus group takes 2 to 3 weeks typically. It's a lot less expensive than doing focus groups. And you may find that it's less expensive than quantitative survey research, depending on the methodology that you're using. And that quantitative research may be overkill for your project, or the reverse, it might just be underkill because you don't get the exact answers you want, and therefore you have this risk of, well, I need to do this follow-up, but I don't have time to do a follow-up survey, and the survey didn't tell me what I needed to know, or maybe it led me to have more questions than I had answers. So the next area is real-time user experiences. When you're in a community forum like Digsite, you have the opportunity to see people maybe uploading photos or video as they're using products or seeing your concept for the first time. And so this really gives you a different context for what their responses are. And it gives you that opportunity to do that on-demand optimization. So you can kind of look at what are their responses, and you can change the next day's activities and say, you know what, maybe I'll actually want to change this up and ask different questions tomorrow, or maybe I want to show them another concept because I've gotten the feedback that these 3 things are really important and we didn't address those in our initial concept. And the last thing is visual storytelling. Online communities can be very visual. Not only do you get quotes, but often photos and video, and you really do get to know people. And sometimes people think that that's only the kind of information that you can get in person. But I'll tell you, this is really a secret, but maybe something that if you haven't done a lot of industry online research in a community type forum, you may not understand. But I'll put it in the context of you. So imagine that you're, I don't know, let's say you're in your kitchen at 10 o'clock at night and you log in to complete a Digsite activity and somebody shows you an idea and you get to respond to it. How do you think you might respond differently than if you were in a focus group room with 8 other people and a moderator there? Well, the answer is you're going to respond a heck of a lot more honestly at your kitchen table because there's nobody there to bias you, there's nobody there to make you feel uncomfortable, and there's nobody there in particular that you're thinking you're trying to please. And so what happens is you tend to get really honest feedback, good or bad, but you also tend to get really honest context as well. So people are willing to share with you that their child is sick or what's going on or things that they might feel a little less comfortable sharing in a social setting. And so really sometimes you get these really rich stories from people in an online forum that you just don't get in person because they feel a sense of security and privacy in their own environment. Now, we mentioned in this whole presentation is about preparing for a retailer presentation, but I want to point out that this kind of agile research approach that we use for PD Holdings can be used for a wide variety of issues. And really, when you think about it this way, when you have a key business decision that you're trying to make, and and it affects your customers, which probably most of your decisions do, there are really, when you think about it in an agile research way, there's 3 things that you'll want to do. First is prioritize your customers' needs. The second is to actually build and optimize very specific concepts to solve that need, something that they can tangibly react to. And then you're going to want to iterate based on that learning. I know we all love to think that we get it right the first time, but with consumers and your customers, sometimes it's really hard to do because you don't know everything about how they're using your products or how they might use a future product that you're envisioning. And so what agile research really does is say, how can you do that very, very quickly in a time period of a week or 2, and then repeat that process as needed. And so think about it as being much more economical to do qualitative research and to do it very quickly with a smaller group of people rather than waiting to do these large quantitative studies that might derail your whole project or cost you a lot to find out that you have to go 3 steps backwards. And so it's really this idea of thinking about small decisions that are key, that are important, and doing research as you have those questions along the way, rather than saving it up for the end or doing it all up front and then maybe coming up with questions later that you can't answer. Here at Digsite, we have kind of 6 different types of sprint activities, types of things that you might consider for when you have these kinds of decisions. So, for example, if you're trying to adjust your brand positioning, this is a great opportunity to do agile research. If you're trying to develop an advertising or communication concept, and you want some feedback on that. If you're developing product ideas, whether you're early stage or even later stage in your beta testing of products, it's a good opportunity. If you want to really optimize that customer experience and you want to understand how people are experiencing your products now, or even your competitors' products or new products, it's a great opportunity to do agile research. Packaging concepts. So if you're looking at how you're communicating your product on the shelf, great opportunity to do a sprint with early packaging ideas. And then finally, website optimization, whether you have a web app or whether it's just a website. Really getting people to look at and give you feedback on individual pages within that site, the navigation of the site, even having them do specific activities like shopping, are all things that you can do in a very agile way, very quickly through your development process rather than waiting until the end. And then before we get to Q&A, I was just going to point out a couple additional resources that are available on our website. One is the Digsite Sprint Brochure. If you're interested, you can go to our website and download that, as well as the specific case studies for PD Holdings, which we can provide you as a follow-up to this webinar as well. And that has all the details that I've presented today, along with text and commentary that might not be on my slides. So could be a really useful resource if we're trying to help people internally understand how they might better use this type of research approach, either for retail presentation or for other purposes. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions.
All right. Thank you, Monika. And got a few questions that have come in. And again, feel free if you have questions to go to your GoToWebinar control panel on the right of your screen and add your own questions. Okay. First of all, a question from Trenton asking, how did you arrive at 30 respondents per cell or per group? Is that some kind of magic number, or what do you think?
You know, it's an interesting research question because if any of you have grown up in research, you know that oftentimes we've kind of discovered through trial and error that to get good focus group results, we typically need at least 3 focus groups from any given target audience to really come to a consensus around this information is valid, and that's about 25 people. And so really we think about qualitative research that if you can get a quorum of 25 like-minded people together, you're going to probably get to some pretty good results that are probably going to scale pretty consistently into quantitative research. You may not be able to tell the differences between the nuances, but certainly the big things that are either this is important or this is not important are going to come out. But I put that caveat about audiences in there because if you mix up different people with different types of needs and you have 25 of them in there, you might get a little bit more levels. And that's why this was really great that we did kind of 30 moms and we did 35 millennials, and then we're able to really with each audience understand their needs more specifically.
Okay. All right. Another question here. To your point about making sure you're presenting insights on the right consumer for the retailer, can you screen, using the social find recruiting approach, can you screen for specific demographics and psychographics using social find?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually fairly amazing and sophisticated out there what information is available on social media about folks, and so we're able to look at demographics. Sometimes we actually look at them in fairly different ways than you would for a typical research study. For example, rather than asking people are thinking that social media has good predictive information on income, which it doesn't, we look at things like home ownership or likes and interests in particular types of brands that are very highly aligned with economic status to help us drive to the right consumer target in that space. So we're able to look at demographics, we're able to look at activities, interests, hobbies, as well as some behaviors. Believe it or not, Facebook has data from shopper loyalty programs, so sometimes we can actually see whether people are buying particular products. Or we just recently did a project for a gaming company. We're actually able to see that people were logged on to do online gaming. Those kinds of things we're able to really tell very well. But in addition to that, once we've identified that person on social media, we do then ask them some screener questions very specifically to confirm that we have that information correct.
Okay. Follow-on question to that actually is, do you ever have any concerns that the population of social media users may be a niche, maybe not representative of the total population?
Yeah, so this is a great question. When I started my research career, and I hate to date myself, but we were doing a lot of mall intercept studies. I don't know if you guys ever experienced those early in your career, but basically where you would go to malls and you would intercept people and ask them questions. And we knew at that time that the penetration of mall attendees, in other words, the percentage of the population that had access to and went to a mall, was about 30%. And that was considered a valid population. Now, when you talk about social media sites like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you're talking about 80% of the population. And so we don't really feel like we're getting a niche of the population by using this any more or less than any other research methodology, just because social media is so ubiquitous. And in fact, I think I've been a little bit surprised at some of the types of professionals and professional occupations that we've been able to reach on social media, because really everybody's there. And so if you want to find a teacher, a nurse, whoever, those folks are on social media as well. So we really find we're able to target just about any group that has access to a computer or a smartphone. And I think that would be the only place where I would put a caveat on that, is if you're really talking about a niche target that does not have access to those kinds of devices, which again, most of the population, I'm trying to remember the percentage that have smartphones these days, but it's a vast majority. You're really talking about most of the population.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So, question here is, what's the largest sample size you've actually handled with this type of method?
Sure. So we've ran communities as large as 100 participants. We don't like to do more than 100 participants in a single community, but we've done multiple communities where we've had, say, 2 communities of 75 or 3 communities. So we kind of break it out into multiple groups. Interestingly, just kind of news as of, I guess, yesterday, we have some new tools we've integrated with Qualtrics for survey research. And so if you want to have a Digsite community and maybe run 2 or 3 communities, but have a survey that you're asking across those communities to maybe collect hundreds of responses, we're actually able to do that to get kind of a mix of qualitative and quantitative insights. So it really depends on the client and the project and the objective, how important that sample size is to that particular research study, and we really work hard to have flexibility in that. And sometimes we do slightly different activity types for those larger groups than we might do with smaller groups. So, for example, if you're asking people to upload video, you may not really want to go through 100 videos. You may want to actually do a more in-depth project with fewer people. But if you want to do that whiteboard markup tool, you probably could do that pretty easily with 100 people or several hundred people and get and be able to aggregate those results very easily.
Okay. I guess related to this in these groups, what's the attrition rate for respondents? How many people would fall off over the course of a multiple-day study?
Yeah, we've actually been tracking this, and there are kind of 2 important things about online research. The first is people coming into the community and completing, getting started in the community and initial participation. And sometimes we see people express interest in joining the community, but then maybe don't come online to get started. But once we have people in and complete that first activity, and we kind of know and we over-recruit to make sure we get a good number of people starting that first activity, we see actually 90% retention rates over the course of that community. And that's actually held true even for communities that we've had multiple activities running over several months. So it's been very interesting to watch, but once somebody kind of gets in and starts participating, it's fun. It's kind of addictive, kind of like social media. And so we see people really enjoying that. And we do provide incentives to participants, and so they really appreciate that as well. I think that helps. But I think that it's also just a feeling that they're doing something important. If they're giving you feedback to help you position your brand or develop new products, or they're telling you about themselves and their lives, they feel valued, they feel valuable, and I think that's a part of why the retention rates are so high. Sometimes though I feel like when I fill out a survey, that nobody's really actually listening to me at the other end of that. And it's not very satisfying. And I think a community forum like Digsite is much more satisfying experience for the participants.
All right. Well, I think we have one last question for today, and that's asking about, I guess the heart of this is the analysis. What kind of learning can you get from this research to equip you for your retailer meeting? And the question is simple. Who does the analysis? Is it Digsite or is it the client using Digsite?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the answer is it depends. So we've got sprints so that you can kind of think about it like when you go to a focus group. Oftentimes people get behind the glass. They listen in, they participate in the conversation, they internalize what they've learned, they pull together their presentation or their recommendations, and they go. And that report never gets looked at or never gets written, or maybe you ask the moderator to not write a report. And so we've designed Digsite sprints to allow you to really participate in the community and then go to our automated reporting page and download a report that's auto-generated from the community. Some of it is, very well structured and organized, and some of it is free text that you would need to read through. But that's the base. If folks want to do their own analysis and kind of read through that, they can and make a very fast decision. If they want a more detailed report, we actually have a number of Digsite consultants who can help provide that more structured reporting, whether it's just a quick top line, whether it's a full report. So you really have the flexibility depending on the needs of your project to decide what level of analysis you want. And this also makes it very cost effective. So if you're really just, again, looking to participate and learn, download some automated reports and make some decisions, this is going to be perfect for you. If you want that in-depth report, it's going to work really well for you too. We just layer that on to the project for you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Monika, and thank you to all of you for joining us and for staying with us. This is Jane again, and you can see my information on the screen. And I love, who doesn't love emails? Of course. I love emails and calls and would love to talk with you. If you have any questions or we can kind of help you think through the business questions or you're trying to address, we'd be very happy to do that. Enjoy the rest of your day and your holiday weekend, and thanks again for joining us. Bye-bye.